So we are now live. So first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and attending, and also welcome to the AI series. Just a little quick introduction to myself. My name is Laura, and I am the marketing executive for Oxygen Digital. We specialise in building AI and data science teams, currently in the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and the US. We have kind of created the AI series, which is a mixture of expert panel sessions, which we've got going on today, and also some keynote speeches as well. And we've created this to kind of promote some knowledge sharing and connect our network with lots of different people in lots of different countries. So just give a brief overview of Livestorm for those of you who haven't used it before. You will be able to see on the right-hand side, we do have a panel, and you are able to pop some things in the chat there if you've got anything to say. We have a questions tab, which means that you are able to ask some questions. If you see a question on there that you'd like answering, then feel free to upvote that and it will go to the top of the priority list. We have a polls section as well. So if you see anything on there or we mention about a poll, then please feel free to vote on there and we can use your answers live. Anything that's said in the chats, we'll try and get round to, but also we will have a recording of the event that goes out live to everyone straight after, and also a version on YouTube will come out in a couple of days' time, and that will have subtitles or closed captions, just so that's accessible to everyone. But I'll go ahead now and I will hand over to Jeroen to kick us off. And if anyone needs anything, feel free to pop something in the chat and I'll be straight with you.
Thank you, Laura. So, welcome everybody. My name is Jeroen Vlek. I was asked by Oxygen Digital to organize a panel discussion on AI. And the theme of today will be AI-assisted coding, most notably, of course, GitHub's Autopilot, but there's other tools now also on the market. I'll get to that in a second. And they asked me to organize a panel discussion. So, quick bit of background on myself. I have a background in computer science and AI. Have done multitude of different things in my career, which is also the reason I think the other panelists are sitting here. And currently I am the CTO of SphereMall, and I'm also what I dubbed a technical debt collector at Perceptive Bits, which is my own company. I couldn't think of a better panel than we have today, so let me introduce them to you. First and foremost, we have Christian van Someren, or Chris, and he is the CEO of SphereMall. SphereMall is a SaaS company for optimizing your e-commerce business. Go check them out. They're a great company, and they are hiring. I probably can say this with everyone, but they are hiring, and I can tell from experience they're awesome. So go check them out. Then second, I would like to introduce is of course Ron Dotsch, with whom in my Anchormen period I started the AI Journey podcast. Ron is now, you are the principal data scientist at Anchormen, also a great company, also hiring, I believe. So go check them out. And by the way, we will share links with all of you with all the also all the resources that we mentioned today. Then we have Willem Hendriks, who just recently moved from IBM to BigData Republic. We know Willem from our Snacks and Hacks meetup that we used to organize in Amsterdam. Of course, now because of COVID, we couldn't do meetups anymore, but who knows, maybe in the future. I think everyone is definitely willing, so let's hope we'll be able soon. And let me guess, BigData Republic is also hiring, Willem?
Yeah.
I figured as much. And then last but not least, we have Leon Overweel for Dexter Energy. And also, I didn't really know Leon yet, but thought he was very interesting to have on the panel because he has a very cool a newsletter called Dynamically Typed on a multitude of different subjects, but also one including AI. And he is a data scientist at Dexter Energy, which tries to forecast energy demand. And correct me if I'm wrong there, Leon. You, let me guess, are also hiring.
Yes, so we actually forecast energy demand, but mostly energy production by renewables, so by wind and solar parks. And yes, we are very much hiring. We recently closed a Series A, and we need a lot more people.
Cool. So, okay. So, guys, then I guess it's for all of you, it's time to shine now. The war on talent just started. Okay, so a little bit introduction on the topic itself. I guess most of you are familiar with OpenAI. OpenAI is I'm not entirely sure if it was a foundation, but let's say an organization for, I think it was a foundation founded by Elon Musk and other people to do research into AI, kind of following the Nick Bostrom paradigm that if we're the first to discover superintelligence, then at least we know that it's done by ethical people, and we have the kind of like the front runner advantage. However, I think by now they have been bought by Microsoft, or at least they are working closely together by Microsoft. One of the things, of course, that they've done is built a huge model, GPT, well, first GPT, then GPT-2, and now GPT-3, which can be used to generate text, which is very hard to distinguish from human written text. And they have now partnered with GitHub, which is also owned by Microsoft, and to train a GPT-3 model on their code base. And on the 29th of June this year, they announced it. So it's still quite a very actual topic. And they have built what they called like a smart, or at least I'll call it a smart autocomplete, where you can kind of in text, in writing, say what kind of code you want to have. Like, for example, I want to have a function, a method, this method should download an image from an API, and then it will generate the code for you. Well, since then, a lot of controversy also arisen, and I'd like to touch upon all of that. It did look pretty awesome. So maybe let's start with you, Ron. Are we out of a job soon?
No, not so soon. Well, maybe you guys, but I'll be fine, I think. No, I think that we have been working as humanity, as mankind. We've always been working to automating more and more of our tasks, right? First externally, later, I guess, cognitively or mentally, like making sure that we can delegate mental effort or intellectual stuff to others or other things. And I think this is just a very logical next step. However, so will we be out of a job at some point? Probably. Is it soon? I don't think so, given what I've seen that we're doing. So right now, if it goes specifically towards CoPilot, what it can do is it can build a function based on some text input, right? So whether it's from a function parameter definition or just from a doc string or something like that. But it doesn't build you the entire app. It doesn't build you what a business stakeholder perhaps needs you to do, right? So there's a lot of work going into more than just building this small functions that are the building blocks of larger programs, larger apps that you need to develop, or larger insights that you need to get. So soon, no, but maybe at some point, yeah.
But do you honestly think that at some point in time it will replace people?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it will replace people, but it will replace chunks of our jobs. Like, and we will evolve into, or our jobs or our job titles will evolve into doing something that still requires human effort. I think that in general, AI, or the promise of AI, is that more and more it takes the human out of the loop, and more it does things autonomically, right? So you have, if you go from looking back to looking forward to predictive analytics to prescriptive analytics, what you see is that more and more the computer is taking over work that usually comes from the human to in the end get some insight or apply something gained from data, and this is something that is there as well, taking a little bit more the human out of the loop. But I think in the end, like, it also depends a little bit on who you are replacing, right? So if you're a developer who needs to write something that's very that you need to think very hard, like say some optimization algorithm, and the answer to that algorithm is not straightforward, it's not clear, it requires a lot of thought, it's like a puzzle that you need to solve, then I don't think that what GitHub CoPilot is right now, I don't think that roadmap will end up in a version 5.0 that is able to come up with that algorithm for you. I don't think that's the case right now with the approach that's taken right now.
Because Chris, would you probably watched some demos as a CEO of a tech company. Is it something you would consider using?
Yeah, definitely. And I watched quite some videos also from developers who were reviewing it, and everyone used the clickbait. We will be out of a job in X years. And when you start viewing it, a couple of people really think that it will replace developers. But I think if we look back in history, we never saw any type of industrial revolution who has replaced people fully, only partially. But I think in general, it optimizes the process a lot. And being responsible for a group of developers and looking mostly what most developers don't like, but I look at the output of the development process. And for me, it doesn't matter how it works as long as the output is there. So that's typically how business users look at it. I do think that it will help a lot if developers can improve their output and increase their output when they don't have to go and spend out half of their time on Stack Overflow anymore. And that it's immediately in their IDE. So I really applaud developments like this, and I think that code will be better, that code will be faster delivered. And what I really like about this point, and maybe to put it on the table already, is that one of the biggest benefits is the automated testing that's applied to the code that's being written. And if I look at the struggle always to get beautiful code, okay, but well-tested code, wow, okay, let's bring in this into our company tomorrow if possible. So I'm a really big fan already without having worked with it at all.
Okay, cool. So Leon, I know from your blog post, you're pretty bullish. You're pretty enthusiastic about the CoPilot. But maybe to kind of would you think though? Would you think that there is the risk? You mentioned the white page problem, which kind of like it's very easy to get started. But do you think there is a risk of developers kind of developing cognitive dissonance with what they actually wrote, so that once the things get more complex, it will be hard to pinpoint? How would that work? How do you see that evolve?
So I really see this as just another level abstraction away from the bare metal. If you look at the history of programming, we all started writing in these punch cards, like punching ones and zeros into them. And then layers and layers got built on top of that, right? At some point we had C, you had to think about like, how do I allocate memory for this variable? How do I destroy the memory, free it back up again? Then you have stuff on top, like a programming language like Python, which is much more like natural language already, where things like memory management and stuff are abstracted away from you. I think this
is not always a good thing, though.
Not always a good thing, but I think if you look in the grand scheme of things, it enables a lot more people to do a lot more stuff a lot more easily than if everyone was using C. And while there's still, of course, a use for C in specific contexts, I think things like this are just natural progressions in terms of both how efficient the current crop of developers are in developing the stuff they need to get done, plus enlarging the potential group of people who can be interacting in such a way with computers. So if you look at yesterday, OpenAI actually demoed the newest version of their Codex model. So Codex is the OpenAI model that underlies GitHub CoPilot.
That's the debug, also for the people listening, that's the debug.co URL, right? This which I think is a Y Combinator alumni.
No, so just a new demonstration that they did yesterday of the newest model, which one of the key things where this is again made it quite obvious that they are partnering with Microsoft a lot is one of the things they demonstrated was they built a plugin into Microsoft Word where you can speak to it and it does text to speech, or it does speech recognition. And then it actually feeds the command you said into Codex. So an example they had was they put this thing next to a Word document where they pasted some really ugly text. And then they said to Codex, remove all the leading spaces. Codex translated remove all the leading spaces into calls into Word's internal API, and then executed it and removed all the internal spaces. Then next they could say, make every 5th line in my document bold. It's processing for a while, and then it also turns that into code that gets run and executed right away. So I think, to round back to your question, I think it's okay if we don't understand everything that's going on under the hood. You know, when I'm programming machine learning stuff in Python, I also don't know how the memory gets allocated. I think this is just another step where I know what I'm telling the computer to do, but I don't necessarily need to see how it calls a specific Microsoft Word API or an email client API or a TensorFlow API.
Right, because you still have access to the code being generated. So if something goes wrong, you could link into that. Willem, I wanted to ask you because I saw. Well, first of all, maybe more broader question, Willem. How narrow is this AI?
Yeah, I don't think it's suited for everything. Right now, my gut feeling is for helper functions. So sometimes when I'm making some code, I need a little helper functions. That is my first intuition how I would help. Oh, please make this helper function for me. And like Ron said, the whole A to Z of a complete application, that's maybe too much to ask. So I guess where I am comfortable in using something like this is for my little helper functions. And then, like Christian said, if the tests are automated, oh well, then I have more confidence to do it. Because if the tests are all green, tuck, 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 and then my helper function is done, then I say, okay, now that's something that I want to write. So, and I'm okay if it's that narrow. If it can do that little thing, my little helper functions, like the distance for 2 long pairs, then I would already be happy and impressed if it can do that piece really well. Yeah.
But do you? So I guess the general consensus is it's mostly a productivity enhancing tool. How do you guys then? I want to come back to that later. But how do you guys then kind of see the licensing controversy and the kind of also GitHub's response to like, well, it's this, learning, training machine learning models on public data is what we've always done and what the whole community has done. So this should be okay. How do you guys see that? Because apparently it does quote things verbatim also.
I mean, I think if you take this into the extreme, you get into Oracle's suit against Google about basically reusing the developer-facing Java API for Android. Google won there. So I think if it's okay to copy basically the entire front end of a language and implement your own backend under it, I can hardly see it being a problem if you have some snippets from an open source code base that end up being pushed into your code. So I'm personally not too concerned about this.
And the question.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and the point is, of course, where's the added value, right? So what do they add to it, and what are you paying for? You're not paying for all those code snippets because you can grab them still yourself. So, but you pay for someone who took a lot of time and effort. So 1 billion to be precise, So that's quite a lot of money to get access, not access to this data, but to bring it in such a way to the community that it's helpful and adds a lot of value. So for me, I'm not in the camp of the big bad Microsoft. So I do think that they do some things in a dodgy way, but I do really understand why they do it and what they intend with it. So for me, it's totally okay that they put a license fee on it.
Oh, no, sorry. So license.
Oh, you mean the license for the use of the code? You mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
But that's
that same answer. I'm also okay with that because you already put it in public domain. So then with that you already say yes to it, right?
I think currently the pricing I also wanted to touch upon later. But what happened is they trained the model on MIT licenses and Apache licenses, and maybe even more progressive licenses. And some of those licenses say you can include our code, but if you do, your project will need to have this license as well, or pay a fee or face consequences. And if you really quote certain lines verbatim, then people could argue, hey, you took this directly from my project. So you should have an open source license as well.
But do you know if they pick it verbatim, or is that an assumption? Because I didn't see it anywhere in one of the demos I watched, to be honest.
Well, I think for me, proof that it's in there is simply the working credentials, which is another topic. Well, what happened is, and this is already, so I wouldn't blame OpenAI for this, because what happened is that apparently this happens quite a lot. People commit their, for example, AWS access keys or other credentials. They commit it to GitHub. Publicly.
I'm also guilty here. I can imagine waking up at night. Oh my God, I committed the keys. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think
GitHub alert you of that now, right? I think actually, if you try to push something that looks like an AWS key, it'll send you very scared emails being like, no.
I think in the codex paper of OpenAI, they actually estimated the amount of times of this happening to about 0.1% of it giving you verbatim code. And which is quite low, but it's still there, so the possibility is still there. But I also think that like I don't at some point I don't see the difference between an artificial neural network reading code and then producing new code based on what it learns, and a biological neural network, ours, that reads code.
Yeah, I fully agree, Ron.
It learns to produce new code, right? So I don't. So I am with Christian on this. That I think that's at least from a conceptual point of view, I'm completely okay with it. From a legal point of view, I think you should ask a lawyer in the end. What are the rules and laws there? Yeah. But it's tricky. I'm guessing that there is
maybe there should be new licenses, because there was a discussion like this with photos, pictures of people, and then maybe there should be a AI trainable or neural trainable little, because then we shouldn't have any discussion. And then if I put my picture on Facebook, AI trainable would be a nice little click to have. Okay,
they would be really happy with your photo, Willem, for many purposes.
Yeah. They can use my ugly face, no problem with that.
No, I didn't say that at all.
No, but this was talked before with faces of pictures from, I think, in Instagram. I don't know, and people say, oh, it's all right, it's in the public domain. Then AI was
Clearwater AI, right? They did this.
I don't remember, but then there was the same discussion. Are you allowed to train something smart with some purposes for So the licenses are maybe a little bit old-fashioned, and they should include something like AI trainable or neural trainable, biological or none, right? And then it's at least clear for everybody then what you give your data for.
Well, this might also be maybe a cultural shift between generations, right? Because I think we're all as young as we are, we for sure. I grew up with hey, watch out what you put on the internet, because when it's out there, it's out there. And I feel newer generations maybe they feel like they should be protected more from that, which opens up a whole new kind of worms, of course. But
who knows?
It's quite a different angle, I would say, but I still in the camp. If you commit your code in the public domain under either license, I honestly doubt that most developers understand the full grasp of those licenses under which they commit. But you know it, right? And that's also your own responsibility. And if there comes a new dynamic that people say, "Hey, I don't want a big bad Microsoft to crawl my data," so I start with a closed GitHub. Okay, yeah, that's up to you. But I don't think that it will go in such direction.
Yeah, but there's also a risk, right? So this is from the perspective of people putting code out there, and I totally agree. But what about the users of GitHub CoPilot, right? They are not necessarily, they don't really know when maybe they copy something and when they don't, right? And they don't really, actually this is also a big problem, is who is using the GitHub CoPilot, also with regards to the tests, right? We're all happy with the fact that it automates test writing. But who is checking the tests? Right? Who is checking?
Who's testing the tester?
Who's testing the test? And in the similar vein, when you use GitHub Copilot, unfortunately, I didn't get a key to enter the beta or to check it out in the preview. But the way I've been seeing people using it is you need to basically like autocomplete tab to 20 different forms of the code before you pick the one that might be helpful here. So it's how bad can it become when you put a poor programmer in the position of developing something using GitHub Copilot, and you assuming as a CEO that it's going to be great because it's or CTO because it's
the great AI created it.
Yeah, and there's automated tests, and it's all based on 10 billion lines of GitHub code of great code. So, and then you assume the code is great, but
isn't the giving a toddler a shotgun a bad idea anyway?
Yeah, and then so Copilot is the shotgun here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm the toddler.
No.
Well, but, I think one big risk here definitely is also poisoning of the training data. So I could, if I'm a nefarious person, I could right now make a project on GitHub, license it MIT, and make a function that says access my private database, and then instead of accessing a private database, I just take whatever the inputs are and I send it to some email address that I control. And if some developer isn't watching what they're doing, they may use my very handy access private database function, and instead of accessing their private database, they're sending their credentials to me.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the bigger risks here. If you're just running some Copilot stuff and not actually looking at the code, which I imagine, we've seen what happens with Tesla Autopilot, where people start going on their phone, even though, Tesla very explicitly tells them you're still responsible. If 99% of the time it goes right, as a human, you just start not checking it anymore.
That's why I like the name Copilot as opposed to Autopilot, actually.
Yeah, or Pilot. Yeah, but yeah, no, totally true. It can go even further. That the what if you suddenly then have this nice a library maybe based on something like a Puppet or Terraform, and you autocomplete something for that, and suddenly you have a Bitcoin miner on your infrastructure, and your infrastructure is closed, and you have 10,000 euros or maybe more in AWS bills. Actually, this is nothing to do with Copilot, but a friend of mine told me that the organization he works for, which shall not be named, because it's still investigation is still running, one of the developers or someone committed the actual credentials to public GitHub, and they had a mining operation running on their infrastructure. They were hacked that way. And the question is then, of course, if 0.1% sounds not like a lot, but if you multiply that by the costs of something, it could become dangerous.
Yeah, but the overall conclusion, I would say, from that point of view, is the same as that the other guys already made. You still need a really skilled guy who's operating it. and it will improve his output. But that's why I don't think that this will, in the upcoming 10 years, and maybe after 10 years, I will sound very naive at that moment in time. But I don't think that we see a machine building a full application. You need something like architecture, the talk with the business, the translation of that, and we know how complex that is, right? So
I guess that is full AI, right? That is the end step. Because if you have something that can generate code for you, that should be general AI, right? Because if it works 100%, it should understand everything about humans and then create it for you.
Well, I think we really have to worry if the CoPilot will answer with these requirements are garbage.
Yeah, just checked in with the CTO. No, that would be awesome, of course. No.
So,
what Obrion is saying in the chat, I think that's a good way of putting it. That it shifts the skill base to a higher level, so software architecture becomes more of the key skill to have. So I think it sort of bifurcates it, maybe. So it'll force junior level developers to be thinking more about the high level stuff that maybe mediors or seniors are now concerning themselves about. And on the other hand, it'll allow people who aren't developers at all to do stuff that previously they needed to get a developer to do for them.
And everyone's hiring, right? So it's not like there's not enough work to go around.
I think there are more ideas still in the world than we can code together in the upcoming decade. So I wouldn't be worried about that. And as you know, Jeroen, with our company, we made quite a big leap in the past year from moving our development from Ukraine back to the Netherlands. And why? Because we see that the skill level, especially on architecture and business-driven design, that type of things, we saw that really task-driven developers have a really hard time to do that. And I do think that the idea of a developer specializes more in a guy who understands the full spectrum, understands architecture, and becomes broader instead of a commodity. A guy who can type some lines of code and publish Hello World or something like that, right? So that's a really, and I do see that in a bigger, in a broader sense in the market. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think also, especially, what's very nice about this is also it removes a lot of what you mentioned, Leon, in your blog post, the white space problem. But inversely, the not having to type boilerplate all the time. And of course, you should automate boilerplate, refactor it, and all that. But still, it does make you more productive because you can really focus more on the business logic.
Yeah.
So, what I did think was interesting, and that this might be maybe a bit more technical. Also, disclaimer: I tried to get into the beta, but I'm still on the waiting list.
Yes.
It does best also what they say themselves on dynamically typed languages, and that kind of made me thinking, because if it does well on typed languages, and I believe Go is I have no experience in Go, but I believe Go is a typed language that can do some Rust, I saw, and C also. But would GPT-3 then kind of learn an inverse compiler if it knows what files and whatnot? What do you guys think?
I was thinking. Go ahead.
Yeah, the inverse compiler. Can you tell what you mean with that?
So what I mean by that is that you it was trained on the code to the and then you give it not inverse, or maybe not inverse, but it should learn the language rules then, right? Because it needs to know if something compiles or not. And at the same time, I guess it should be everything that's pushed to GitHub should compile, but I'm sure there's examples of repositories that do not compile. So would it learn those compile errors also then, or those mistakes? What do you think, Willem? I know you're learning Rust also, so.
Yeah. So, but with GPT-3, I saw already it could produce some JavaScript, which I think is impressive because it's more or less a guess the next words machine. So I was really amazed by, and I say how simple. Of course, it's a huge network, but how simple the concept is. Guess the next word, and then how well it can do things that I thought would require far more intelligence. And then it already did compilable JavaScript. So GPT-3 was already able to do.
You mean compatible TypeScript, or?
How to say it? Non-error JavaScript. JavaScript is not compiled. How to call it? Copy pastable without.
You mean it's correct? That's what you mean.
But I think in the Codex paper they tried it out on this evaluation set, right, of this 100 or 1,000 programming programs that they problems that they have the answer to handwritten, and I think that that in the end GPT-3 was able to do 0 of them.
Yeah.
So even though it will look quite promising, and it is promising because it's still the same backbone, you have to do the additional work to make it really understanding code and syntax. What I actually found interesting, Jeroen, from your question is, I had a different thought. Is what does it tell you about the property of dynamically typed languages, that they are easier to learn by a artificial neural network?
Oh, don't get me started. No. So I think so. It's not a very contrarian position. I think dynamically typed languages are great. I enjoy programming in them. I just know that once the team gets bigger and you have more people working on a code base, I prefer to switch to statically typed languages. And nowadays, most compilers are so smart, you don't even need to put the type everywhere anymore, because the compiler can infer it, right? Rust can infer it, Scala can infer it, etc. And then having a compiler check things is I think is very very good, because it's the first check on your logic if it sounds or not.
I would be really interested in Leon's opinion about this.
So just starting from why GPT-3 probably can't learn the syntax of a language very well. I think even very simple things like matching brackets, like if I open a bracket, open one, close one, open another one, close one, do I need to close the next one to like make these match? It already couldn't do simple problems like that. So I think actually the more complex the language is in terms of like just purely syntax, that's already quite hard. But apparently they're getting codecs to solve this. So what I'm quite interested in, I guess going off on a bit of a tangent, is how they're actually beating this network with a stick to get it to understand all these syntactical and also typing things that
you can take it into your gradient, right? Like the compiler output.
Yeah, so that could be it. It could also be, I'm thinking a bit about Tesla's neural network, actually. Andrej Karpathy, the lead of their AI team, he actually does a talk about every half year or so with quite some detail about how that works. They're very big on having
also on your newsletter, by the way, I saw.
Yeah. They have a thing where they create a set of unit tests that are partially used for training and partially used for testing the neural network. So actual like input-output pairs that are sometimes like partially generated, sometimes just examples from the real world. So maybe what they're doing is just building.
Wait, do you mean like a validation set, or can you explain in a bit more detail how that works?
So it's basically if they come across an edge case in the real world where autopilot doesn't work, they send the fleet to collect more data that looks a little bit like that, have people hand label what the correct either label or action to do there is. And then part of those examples become part of the training set, and part of those become a new unit test, which is like, can I recognize when a stoplight is actually on the back of a truck being transported instead of hanging over the road and I need to stop in front of it? Yeah. And then I think as you build up a really big set of those unit tests, you can start to maybe include those as part of your gradient, and like every time you make the model a little bit better. So I wonder if they're doing the same thing for like understanding types, getting things to compile or not. Yeah.
That's also either way good engineering practice, right? If you have a bug, make sure it doesn't regress anymore by also really writing a test specifically for that bug.
Yeah. And
by the way, Overweel wrote in the chat, I think also to the multi-language discussion, that's actually quite genius. You can write from any language and convert the final code to the fastest language, like C++, for example, or why not assembly right away? Perhaps even add automated efficient multithreading. Is that so? I'm not entirely sure. Does he mean you can already do that with codecs, or more like that would be a cool feature to have?
I would assume you could do it, right? One of the big things you saw people do with GPT-3 is they wrote a sentence and then they said, write this like I'm Shakespeare. And then you had the same meaning of the sentence, but written in a really old prosy way, or like write it like I'm Robert Frost, and then it becomes depressing or something. So I'm guessing you could probably get codecs to do the same thing, saying like, here's a function in Python, now write it in C++.
Write it like John Carmack, the Doom programmer.
With the weird, what was again this hack that the anyway.
Yeah, the inverse, something.
That's the one, the inverse square root, which and no one knows where it came from. Yeah.
Indeed. I was thinking of the AlphaGo version 1 and 2. In version 1, they had to hard code ladders, a thing in the game. So they had a special input and output of the network a use for ladders in this game. And then the second and the third version, they made it clean, and it was not giving anything, any information. So if the network has very difficult with brackets, maybe you can treat them like ladders in the game. Then you have a special bracket side thing that's outputting, should there be a bracket or not? And for the Go, this helped the first version, but apparently it was not needed in the second version. But you can always
you also have.
Isn't that maybe more on because then you're training it. Sorry, Ron, but then you're training it for like a specific language. Not all languages have brackets.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's about the concept of scope, right?
Yeah. But then you can more or less steer the neural network. That's what you need to train, and just like
similarly, there's this is very similar. You know the OpenTag network, this network that can help you to tag. Basically, it's finding elements in sentences like that you want to find using also a language model. But what OpenTag is doing, it kind of forces that, for instance, when you have some named entity that you want to detect, that there is a beginning tag, an open tag, a close tag, and there is something, a middle part, right? And so it ends up using something like, I think it's like a Gaussian random fields or something like Markov chain, like at the end of your entire cycle, inference cycle and training cycle, that makes sure that enforces that only things in a specific order are treated as correct answers, right? And so when you add this to your entire pipeline and also use this during training, it can actually help the network learn only the right order of things. And maybe something like this is also enforced with the brackets, like when the number of open brackets and closing brackets are equal,
Can't you just say just have it compile? Just compile the
and then if it doesn't compile, don't learn. Yeah.
I mean, convergence will be a lot slower then, but
yeah, probably. But what's interesting is that nobody knows. We haven't been given the information of how this actually works. We know.
Well, that's a good. I like that segue, Ron. Indeed, how do you how dangerous is this? I know they didn't want to release GPT-3 beta access. You need to register because otherwise people might be starting to read tweets in Trump's name. What do you think this should be open, this AI?
Even with GPT-2, they did this, right? That was actually about a year-long process where first they had this really big version with, I think, 700 million or 700 billion parameters or something that they released, that they kept for themselves. And like step by step, month after month, they released like a tiny version. They were like, oh, are people using this to create giant like fake news bots or something? No. Okay, we'll do the next one. what they did with GPT-3, which they wrapped into their API, I've played with that quite a bit, built some stuff with it as well. What they did there was they have this like safety shell that they build around it. So now you're no longer downloading this neural network and running it in your own infrastructure. What you're doing is you're sending something to their endpoint, and then they run it, and then they give it back. But before they give it back, so what they do for GPT-3, for example, is they run it through something that checks like, am I saying a bunch of racist stuff, or am I being really sexist? And then it'll still sometimes give it back to you with a label saying like, there's probably something in here that you don't want to just like dump into a user output, leaving it up to the app. And then I think sometimes it just blocks completely and says, I'm not going to give you an answer to this.
That's the good. I'm sorry, yeah, but that's the ethical part of that thing, of course, right? So they split the usage into two areas. So one, you can access it through the API, and they actually can curate it, which is a good thing when it comes to these things. I'm quite sure about it. But on the other hand, that's what Microsoft paid $1 billion for, is to have exclusive access to the neural network itself, right? And that's where you can put some doubts on the table. That on the one hand they use maybe the excuse that they are playing the best guy in the room, but on the other hand they limit access to it and also the possibilities, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. But just going on and like extending this to CoPilot and to Codex, you could very well see that if you're scared about something like vulnerabilities or something being introduced into your code, having any stuff that gets generated by Codex first pass through a filter that tries to detect like, am I inserting an AWS key that I don't recognize or something into this, which can either be something that GitHub provides as a service, or it can be something that a third-party company that licenses Codex access from OpenAI/Microsoft, depending on who they're paying to, I guess, does this sort of filtering UI step on top of it and then pass it through to the end user.
Yeah, and what if the runaway effect already happened, and because this is an oracle, right? I don't know. Have you guys some of you read Superintelligence?
It's on my list, Jeroen, after you mentioned it.
You have no excuse that it's still on.
Superintelligence.
Yeah, it's a book by Nick Bostrom, and it's kind of where he argues, which was one of the reasons actually that OpenAI was founded, where he argues that there will be basically the first AI that's maybe not becomes conscious, but that's intelligent enough to know that it's an AI, that it can improve itself, write its own code, wink wink, and that will be that because of the exponential growth, that it doesn't matter anymore if a second one comes, this one will win because it will grow so fast, and we can try to reason with it and say that. I think the best example in the book is where he talks about making paper clips, that having morals and values is orthogonal to intelligence. So if the goal of the AI is something as trivial as make paper clips, and then it will turn the whole universe into paper clips, turn every atom into paper clips, it can pretend towards us for now that it cares about our values and morals and values until, of course, it doesn't need us anymore, and then it will turn us into paper clips as well. And
movie Her, right?
I think there's like a very fine line between keeping the AI dumb enough to teach it morals and values, but in order for it to understand, not even going down the rabbit hole of what are the best morals and what are the best values, because we don't even know amongst ourselves. But okay, let's say we do know. To teach it to an AI, it already needs to have a base level of intelligence. How do you not know that that's already enough for it to have this runaway effect? And why I'm saying this is that they expose this now through this API and in a very dystopian science fiction kind of way. Maybe this is also the way it could escape.
Yeah, and then we make sure that the sun does not enter the atmosphere of the Earth anymore, and so there's no power. And then they harvest human bodies to get their power supply, and then we all know the ending to that.
That's a good idea for a movie, Ron.
Yeah.
but I only see some sort of time lock, because if it's really working, I guess the genie is out of the bottle. Somebody showed you take code, you take a network, and it can produce.
Yeah.
So the money they bought is more or less some time to be ahead, because at some point there will be a guy starting the open source codex, and then
Yeah, I agree with. It's just more that the argument in the book goes that that even though someone will do that, the AI that's already out will advance so quick, so multi-exponential, that it will never be overtaken by this open source AI.
Yeah. If they both start to compete with each other, then the other one has a kickstart, and
nestle themselves in satellites and try everywhere.
And Jeroen, you did a little wink at the moment you said creates a better version, because that's of course right. Codex. If you can say make a better version of yourself, and it suddenly starts to make this, then we have maybe general AI. So that's maybe the first things we should try if we have access. Make a better.
Maybe if you take away the part that can interpret or parse or execute the code, then we'll be fine, right? So it can write whatever it wants as long as nobody hits the run button.
It's never executable, so that's that feels like a good fail-safe.
Yeah, I would do that. I think there's some kind of sandbox environment actually also written in the paper, in the Codex paper, that they've built a sandbox around it so that it does not just execute whatever it wants.
Exactly. O'Brien says that's exactly what the argument in the book is. It can just manipulate us into getting it out of its whatever safety out of its cage, if you will. So indeed, that's exactly the argument in the book.
I've seen a lot of AI already, and I do think you guys as well. But I hope that nobody is under assumption that this is something that could happen in the let's say 5 years, because I don't want to look stupid in the
at Anchormen, they have a presentation which contains a slide with a tweet, which is awesome. I'll look it up in a bit, but it says it shows this picture of this pond, and in it is this I guess it's a maintenance robot or something. It looks a bit like R2D2, and it malfunctioned somehow, and it drove in the pond. And the tag, you know that one? The meme is like it's what was it? It's 2020 or something, and we were promised flying cars, but all we got was suicidal robots.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think maybe the more down to earth ethical thing is why isn't this open, right? And is it good that it's not open, right? So the fact that's behind
it's a little ironic. It's called OpenAI, right?
Yeah. And the paper is not even describing the architecture, right? So and I'm on the fence on whether that's good or not. It depends on whether you think that kind of knowledge should not be open. But from a scientific point of view, you would want everything to be open, right? And
but should our nuclear secrets be open because it's better for science? So that everyone can build a nuclear plant, but also a nuclear bomb. I guess.
But for whom is it then safe to have that knowledge?
But that's always a difficult question, of course, right? So was it safe in the hands of Trump? I think that a lot of people doubt about that, and that we could be happy that always one other person was needed to push a button. But we all know what happens when you put everything out in the open on the internet, right? So it will take one day to be fully racism, sexistic, and everything bad you can imagine. So
if it's not already, right? So we have no way to check, and that's the other side of the coin.
Well, no, don't even mind. Now this is really a tangent, but don't even mind nuclear threats. But what about bioengineering threats? You can download programmable viruses where you can put in your own DNA or RNA and manipulate them as you will, and we'll, we could have a maybe not a gray goo but a green goo on our hands very soon. Yeah, exactly. Combine it with, so O'Brien, I don't know if this will be in the video, O'Brien says you can already use AlphaFold to make proteins prions. Exactly. So if you start linking all those things together, indeed. So maybe coming back, yeah?
Yeah, just going back to the AGI thing. I remain very unconvinced that all the very cool stuff that is happening in all the AI labs is even tangentially approaching something that we would call AGI. That's just how I feel about it.
I hear you. It's so first of all, of course, how general is human level intelligence, right? That's I think that's.
I mean, even if you actually sit down and try to write a definition for what you think is AGI, there's a good blog post on this that I'll try to look up. But yeah.
I hear you. Yeah. At the same time, so I'm actually reading a book right now. So I haven't finished it yet, but it's called 1,000 Brains from Jeff Hawkins, guy who started Palm and then, or was co-founder of Palm and then started Numenta. And there he claims to have figured out how the neocortex works, right? Which is how we think, and it's basically the premise is that everything is a movement, is about moving through reference frames, because everything in the neocortex is the same or kind of very similar architecture. So and it's very similar to having location and map neurons, and you have reference frames, and you just build reference frames partly for your body and partly for objects, and that's how you think. Kind of extrapolating from that, there's a lot of disclaimers surrounding this. Again, I still have to finish the book, but that could mean, of course, that as long as you add more layers to your neural network, you'll get there, right? That's kind of the vibe of the book, at least.
Yeah, or one or two more breakthroughs, right? The training like we do now is maybe a little bit too artificial, and then somebody has a breakthrough, another one has one, and but indeed, I'm far more concerned about the Earth getting flooded, the climate is changing, and nuclear wars than AI that is going to kill people.
So I found what I was talking about. This was actually a response to superintelligence. It was a blog post called, and also a presentation in 2014 already, or 2016, I'm sorry, called "The Idea That Eats Smart People." And what they're arguing is that in the near future, the kind of AI and machine learning that we have to face is very different from AGI in that it has ethics problems of its own, right? They're about how people can exploit other people and how lapses of thought can introduce immoral behavior into automated processes that we can no longer check. So like we're sitting here arguing about what's going to happen with AGI, well, that's really the stuff that we should be worried about. And then a quote from that he included in this presentation from a few hundred years ago is, "If everybody contemplates the infinite instead of fixing the drains, many of us will die of cholera." Which I think is a great quote.
Indeed, yeah, and you can already see it now, right, with all the deep fakes, and now apparently even our I think that was debunked later, was the story that the Dutch parliament, some members of Dutch parliament were interviewed by deepfake, but then it turned out to be just an actor. So,
a guy in a mask.
Wearing a mask. By the way, Laura asked for the link, but I suggest we just make a list of links also with the books we discussed and everything you guys want to add, and we'll share it with everyone at the end. But before that, and of course you can share it, put it in the chat. So Chris, maybe from a bit more of a business perspective, what do you, and I understand this is a very difficult question, but how, basically where I want to go to is, what would you be willing to pay for a license on this, right? Because it's like, in a sense, like, because it doesn't replace a developer. You still need a developer. At the same time, it increases the productivity of a developer. So is it, and maybe not put a hard number on it, but maybe something like 20% of a junior developer salary. Is that?
Well, actually, that was already discussed in one of the videos I was watching, and I will share that link as well, because I found it super interesting approach. So that it would mean estimate that you can, instead of have a 5 people development team, go to a 4 people development team, just because you remove so much overhead and recurring tasks, and then it would be quite easy. So if that would be one developer, yeah, fine with me. If it outputs that value, so the price is as high as the output is delivering it. So I will be willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
If it means shorter time to market and better quality, then it's definitely worth something.
Can it debug code? Can it fix your bugs? Because then, oh, okay.
And that's it. But exactly, because I was also thinking this would force developers to step up their game, right? Like you cannot suffice anymore with maybe just doing some simple websites, for example. You need to really step up your game and get into these kind of pro. You need to know how can I use a profiler, right? How can I profile my code? Well, how does that work, right? You need to really. It might actually kind of make like a shift between the people that have the intellectual capacity to go really into the hardcore stuff, right? Like use a JVM profiler, to optimize things, or really see like, hey, but you're calling the database multiple times here, right? Like these kind of things. And of course, the people, maybe the lesser gods, who will be replaced. So you just need to make sure that you're at the right side of the gap.
Now, Ron already mentioned it, that the name CoPilot is well chosen because CoPilot can help you in making your work more efficient. And on the other hand, also slap your fingers the moment that you're making or on your way to making a mistake. So it has different angles on which it can help you. So I think that it should be looked from that area, from that perspective as well. Yeah.
The funny thing is that also oftentimes the co-pilot is someone who is actually trained to become a full pilot, right?
Dystopian again.
No, that's not true in rally driving, right? So the co-pilot is the guy who's navigating and helping you to. But I do believe that you should never put a co-pilot in rally behind the wheel. That he will drive in the woods immediately. So.
Marika asks an interesting question. How easy would it be to do this the other way around? You have code and you would like a textual summary of it, say for documentation or commenting purposes. Could you do that with the models currently available, or would you need to do extensive training yourself first? Well, I don't think Codex can do that, but
documentation, writing documentation is not fun, right? So Marika thought, oh, I never need to write documentation again. I can just,
So I think all of this is just a big scheme to get developers to write documentation. Seriously, what do you guys think on that?
So I think when it currently writes its own methods, it does include documentation. One very practical thing that I'm thinking about is that it usually just ends up using the code above what you're currently inserting as the context. So if in the middle of the code, I'm asking you like, document the stuff that's below here, because like the documentation is always between the like method name, then there's documentation, then there's the code. It would probably only take into account the method name, but given most documentation usually just talks about what the different inputs mean and how you should send them, it could probably get pretty far, and then it could be an easy upgrade to just have some way of including the rest of the method into the context. I think that
couldn't we just like use this codex model and make a variational autoencoder that can then go the other way, and then you just generate the documentation again? No?
Yeah, probably.
Probably, or use GPT-3 itself, of course, right? The output of GPT-3 is human language. So
but Codex is a superset of GPT-3, right?
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, I didn't know.
It's trained on all the text plus all the code.
Okay, yeah.
So I think that if we just start a new convention with having your doc string at the end instead of at the beginning of a function definition, I think you already get there with Codex now.
Yeah, or you're accessing coding through like a Visual Studio Code plugin, right? So the Visual Studio Code plugin could just before it sends your code to CoPilot, it sees, oh, this is the start of the method. Here's the implementation. Let me just paste this like above in the context and then ask.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder to what extent, like if this would work really well, to what extent do you actually need documentation, like static documentation? I mean, if you can have your plugin generate documentation on the fly, maybe also on a specific level of abstraction that you could train it on, right? Depending on how you want to read.
I still think humans will have to refactor once in a while. Also, simply because you could have person A have codecs generate code, and person B have codecs generate code. There will always be integration.
I mean, how about at some point? I mean, it's GitHub, right? How about at some point we get a specific plugin for merge conflicts that just resolves it for you?
That would be nice.
I don't even think that's outside of the realm of possibilities.
Guys, if you just use micro commits, there will never be merge conflicts.
Yes, say that until someone spends 2 weeks on a branch doing a big refactor and then wants to merge it with me.
I think that we will have a refactor CoPilot. We will have a refactor CoPilot. We will have a merge conflict CoPilot. We will have and I don't
think an optimization CoPilot also. Removing redundant calls, restructuring.
Yeah, translation. It's all within the realm of possibilities. The question is just when will we get it?
So do you guys? So does that mean that Codex learned an abstract syntax tree? It might have even learned, because I always preach it's turtles all the way down. The more languages you learn, but I wrote a blog post also. Polyglots is all you need. The more languages you learn, the better it also influences your general understanding of algorithms and programming. Yeah? At the end of the day, a loop is a loop and a variable is a variable. Codex must have these concepts also encoded somewhere.
Actually,
right?
it is, because it suggests in different languages the same solution. And that's one of the problems that people encounter now. So you're working in Vue, and it proposes a solution in a different language. And you really need to be skilled to see the difference between those things, but it is suggesting it. So I think it's already looking from a higher perspective to the structure of the language, and not looking to the language itself anymore.
That's interesting. So that means, because you normally start your definition, you say this method gets an image from the database, but it doesn't take into account the context of maybe import a Vue package or import a React package or something like that.
It mixes everything up. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you can call it an actual abstract syntax tree, but there will be somewhere a hidden layer or an embedding that is representing your source code, and it's probably language independent. It has to be, if the way it seems to work.
But it is a really good question from Marieke, because it was also one of the first things that I was thinking. So I do have programming experience, but I never professionally, and after my study, I never programmed one line anymore, I think. But I do understand pseudocode. So what would be really helpful if it can translate something that was produced in pseudocode, so that I can read it easily and can debate about it with a developer. So, and that's even not the documentation how we would see it, but at least that it goes one abstraction layer up, and that we can have a debate without going into all functions in detail.
It would also be helpful if it could do actually the opposite so it can already do a little bit text to code, but if it can do it from a scientific paper. And it would solve our problem of not having insight in how actually the implementation of GitHub Copilot is, because we just feed it the codex paper and it generates the code for us.
So it doesn't matter anymore at all. So you don't have to understand anything and just feed it into it and get something out.
At least we understand how GitHub Copilot would program itself. I think that's
the little bit disappointing thing there. In my my previous job was a bit more research based, so I spent a lot of time basically just taking deep learning papers that have a lot of linear algebra math in it and trying to translate it into Python, into TensorFlow.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that usually, after a few months of not getting it working, I'd email the authors to get their code. And then you see that the math they wrote in the paper isn't actually all what they did in their code.
Yeah, so it's not correct.
Papers are usually lies.
Yeah, they're too sparse. They miss some important details, or and even example code sometimes is not the actual code that has been used to get the full power of the idea or the concept. I agree.
And the claims of the performance
are also never accurate. Right.
I wouldn't dare to say a lie, but I fully agree with not accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. This happens a lot. It's like also Twitter, machine learning Twitter is full of memes at the moment. By the way, so we have a question. By I think, judging by the name, by a British person, so I might be politically motivated. No. O'Brien McKenzie asks, are you worried about Europe falling behind in AI? Yeah, are we? I know the European Union is investing. Well, they have this AI fund, but at least I know Chris can tell some stories about getting subsidy from them. But
yeah, so that's the first thing that pops in my mind. I do think that we have a problem that we are at least too conservative from innovation point of view in Europe. And the example what Jeroen is referring to is what is it? Horizon 2020 was a program where you could apply for, and in my opinion, we came with one of the best ideas in the world. But the reaction from the board was, it's too commercial. So you will make too much profit from it, so we will not grant you any fees for it. And then I'm thinking, okay, so let's look at the US. The companies who are ruling the world, they are also a little bit commercial. And in Europe, we're still debating about these type of points, and that's holding us back from big innovations, putting money where we will make difference. And especially on AI, I'm fully there. So we are still the triarchs, or becoming the triarchs of the world, where we say, no, everything should be really idyllic, and we only spend money where it will make the world a better place. And I do think that we need to spend our time and money there. But if you never want to have some people or companies to make any profit on that, okay, then we set ourselves back decades. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially to make progress on things like what OpenAI is doing with Codex and CoPilot, these are things that, training these models costs tens to maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. A single training run will probably be $1 million. If you're an AI startup in the Netherlands, you're going to raise a funding round that needs to last you two years, which will probably be several $1 million, like that, and that's not even enough to do a single training run of a model this large. Even universities, MIT a few years ago invested $1 billion into an AI college, whereas universities here, imagine knocking. I mean, I know professors who don't need to imagine this, but if you go knocking on TU Delft's door and asking them for $1 billion to burn on compute, you're never going to get it, right? So in that way, like competing on making the most interesting big new model, where I don't think we have much of a chance. Even and then also, if you look at corporates and stuff, if someone with if you want to go into deep learning research, you can make 2 to 5 times the salary if you go to the US compared to here, even in top paying jobs. So yeah, I think there it's hard to compete with the US and probably also China.
Yeah, we have a professor in our team from Erasmus University, econometrics, and his PhDs leave for the US because they come up with ideas where the capability of doing research on them in the Netherlands just is not there. So I do think this is a fundamental problem where we will encounter some challenges in the near future there.
Maybe yes, I agree. So
maybe just to say one more slightly positive thing, not all machine learning research has to be like $1 million deep learning giant models, right? Like at Dexter we're doing machine learning research with much more modest means, and I think we're also doing interesting stuff and making a difference.
Yeah, I was thinking about. I was a little bit silent because you guys are saying making interesting points, and I agree with them. But I also agree very much with the last point that I think that a lot of the useful stuff is not necessarily these big neural networks.
Yeah, and that's more on the application side, right? And I think that's where we still excel because we even make a lot of quite a good profit with linear regressions. Right, so it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't have to be complicated.
And also there's the question of we point easily to a government not funding our research, right? So that's I've been in academia. I had the same kind of beef with the government from a different side of the table. But at the other hand, I don't think that government funding is the reason why, for instance, in the US, China had a different story, but in the US, companies become so big. There is also probably a different culture, different way of approaching things that we might lack here. And also we have exactly as you've been describing, the brain drain going on. A lot of people go, then they just happen to be first in some of these very exciting areas. So now a lot of people leave to US companies to do the exciting stuff there. But that might have been a question of who got there first, and not necessarily of that something like this would be impossible here.
No, and I also was not intending to say that the government should bring the funding on the table. Actually, I'm a little bit too liberal to be in that side of the camp. So, but what I do think, why do we see big companies investing so much money in the US? Because the government helps them, or at least infuses the ideas that they can grow, right? And in Europe, even if you go out for funding, I'm really happy to hear that you guys at Dexter Energy have Series A. I also have quite a lot of experience with funding rounds in different areas, being an advisor for my own company. But still, the first question you always get from an investor in the Netherlands, at least, is, okay, when will you be profitable? And can you show me your customer pipeline for the upcoming 5 years? Right, so remove all risk, and I think that's in our DNA, and you can see that in governmental things like a Horizon 2020 program. So it's more as an example on how to think and act in Europe than that I would expect that our government pays us, because they also make wrong choices there when they do come up with it. Right, they put Prince Bernhard in front of everything, and money goes in the wrong direction.
Yeah. But maybe going back a little bit to Leon, to what you said also on not everything needs to be a neural net. Kind of. So are you guys familiar with Gary Marcus?
Yeah.
And I think in that there's definitely some truth to it, of course. But kind of philosophically, I think those are two. He says neural networks by itself are not enough. Jeff Hawkins seems to think they are, because in the end it's all networks. Where do you stand on this spectrum? Like, will eventually intelligence, let alone consciousness, emerge from
oh wow, Jeroen.
Networks alone? Or we're almost out of time.
Consciousness is
I wanted to end with a bang.
I think intelligence is enough scope. I wouldn't add consciousness as well to the mix. Well, yeah. Sorry, I spoke out of turn.
Not at all.
Well, you know my background. So my background is actually in psychology and neuroscience before I went into data science and
cool.
And AI. And from what I see is one thing that's extreme. That at least from that perspective, what's very important is embodiment, and having the intelligence being part of a body and senses and all these things. That is something that I really miss still, right? Everything is still like isolated content without a lot of
reference frames, right?
There's no motion, there's no actual action that the AI currently has in the world. I think from that sense, we're still very far away, and I don't think we're gonna get there using the technologies we have there right now. Exactly, I don't know what form they will take, but I do see some interesting cross-fertilization, right? So, for instance, the whole idea of attention being added to neural networks to solve some problems that previously weren't solved, even though attention is already 100 or 150 years old concept in psychology and neuroscience. Neuroscience didn't even exist when attention came there. So I do see that I think in this interdisciplinary way of looking at things, we will get to a point where it becomes even more interesting. Whether you need a neural net.
Are you saying attention is all you need?
No. I'm saying attention is one of the things you need. And there will be probably a lot more things. I think a body is all you need, but that's something else.
Well, so in the book he argues that's one of the reference frames that are provided, right? So
interesting.
If you can give the network a point of reference, like this is you, this is you yourself, a body, basically an abstract body. That could go a long way.
Which book was that?
Which Thousand Brains book?
Oh, the Thousand Brains.
I wrote it down. I will share. That will be my inputs to the list as well.
Yeah.
I would say the physical body is critical, but that's.
Do you know Open Worm project?
No.
It's a little bit scary, but there they, I think, mapped the brain of a little creature and even created an environment for it, and then it more or less lives. So I made it live on my computer, only 2 seconds. That costed me 2 hours of compute, and then I killed the little worm with Control-C. But it's yeah. But conceptually, I was really, whoa. This is this is pretty.
And ethically, it's a crime.
Exactly, because they I think they did the brain in a scanner and they mapped the brain to. But the right, I see it more as a skill about maybe this is a intelligent worm in the worm universe with yeah, right. No.
Well, we might be in the we might be in a simulation right now.
Yeah.
A short anecdote. The first day I met Ron, we were in the car somewhere, and then on the way back, and I got out of the car, and we were actually talking. He was just joining Anchormen, and we talked about this, and I told him, well, who knows? Maybe you're just the AI, and we're all here to train you. And then I got out of the car.
Yeah, I consider myself trained now, Jeroen. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. And now you wake up. Okay.
So,
well, I think So maybe let's do a round of last words. Leon, let's start with you. Any closing thoughts on where this is heading?
Yeah, I think what I was saying initially is still mostly how I feel about it. I'm just very excited about the two-prong approach here of making existing developers just more effective by solving the blank page problem, giving us inspiration about different ways of solving things that we hadn't thought of ourselves, and in general just being a better autocomplete. And then also this thing where for the first time, it takes APIs and turns them, like any third-party API, into any app, any web service, any company, which, there's so many places that you can access with an API now that with a little bit of work, we can access those now with natural language. So, having people who don't know how to code do a lot of stuff that was previously locked away to people who could write a Python script. Yeah, so that's my take, I think.
Okay, Willem.
Yeah. The from the whole spectrum rainbow of programming, there I also see because we say programming, but actually we mean tests, right? Documentation and the helper function and the Git merges. So from that whole thing, I already. The helper function, documentation, and tests, that's already awesome. So if those few can do it really well, then I already think the champagne can be opened. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Chris, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm looking really forward to when it will hit the market with all its promises, right? So are we not looking at Elon Musk, who is reading the brain of a pig again? So and that's something. So it's promising, definitely, especially on the points already what Willem is pointing out. But when would we see it going to the market for everyone available? That would be interesting.
Okay. And Ron.
I agree with everything said before. I do have concerns that I would like to reiterate, in the sense that I think that how well it will be used also depends on the user, and right, who tests the tests, who checks the code, who won't we become too lazy at some point and therefore increase mistakes, these kind of things. I'm also worried a little bit about if this becomes a service you need to pay for. I don't know how expensive it will become, but that it will be like a rich get richer effect, where only people who can afford it will get more productive, whereas people who might deserve it more might not get more productive. So I'm looking forward to see it in action. I'm also looking forward to see how it will affect the universe of developers in the future. I think there's really a problem with openness. at OpenAI right now, and I'm wondering what the future has in stock for us there with the next revolution that they come up with.
Okay. Well, I agree with everything you guys say. I also think there's definitely a possibility of democratizing code or software, if you will. At the same time, it has also indeed potential to increase inequality. I think it comes down again to the cliche: technology is not good nor bad. But I do think though that there will be an asymptote also to this growth, and I think there will be unforeseen consequences, not in the bigger picture, but also really in your project that will still need to be ironed out. So I definitely think it will be a big productivity boost, but not necessarily like I think we all agree a replacement of a good software engineer. But I think the right tool in the right hands will go a long way. So thank you all for attending. This was a lot of fun. We actually filled 1.5 hours, and feels like we could fill even more. So I want to thank you all very much for attending. It was a lot of fun, and thanks for the people at home for watching. Okay, then take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.